Welcome back, everybody, to the Calvary Podcast. My name is Hector Quito. I have the privilege to sit next to Brother Nixon Doughty. He was our guest preacher this Sunday, and we just got a chance to, I think you were at lunch, or just say, come over, let's do the podcast. And I thank you for being here. But how are you?
I'm good. I just got some Chicago-style pizza in my belly, and we went to Luminati's.
Oh, okay.
And so I'm feeling full and ready to go. It was good.
What's been going on in your life? How's everything?
Everything's good. We just got back from our church does a youth choir, and we just got back from our choir tour. After a couple of weeks of that, just got back, and it's been a busy summer, very busy, and this past April I got married too. So it's been a crazy few months.
How's that been?
Marriage?
Yeah. Be honest.
You want to know all about it? Is that what's going on?
Yeah.
Marriage has been good, man. God gave me a good one. She's everything that she's not you know what, this is what I say about my wife. I said she's not, I thought there was, you either got what you wanted or what you needed. And when it came to my wife, Kaylee, I got what I needed and also what I wanted. So.
What do you guys meet?
Well, she's from Arkansas. She's from Northwest Arkansas, and for the last couple of years, been preaching around Arkansas a ton, and she just kept following me everywhere, and I don't blame her, but no, I'm kidding. Yeah. I preached at her church a few times, and I actually went and done a hyphen retreat for her church, and she was at the hyphen retreat, and we had talked a few times, just conversation. And actually, my dad, when I was on my way to the hyphen retreat, he said, hey, he said, I don't care if you like her or not, you need to get Kaylee, you need to get Kaylee's number. I'm like, oh, okay. So at the end of the retreat, I got her number, and about 2 months later, we were engaged. And so the Lord did a quick work.
Yeah. I know some that just take forever. You just went with it, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, she lived 8 hours away, and I'm at the time I was 26, now 27, and yeah, man, I mean, I'm sure you'll understand when you find the one, you'll want to just go ahead and get it over with. So,
but before we get into, I just want to talk to you a little bit, get to know you. But before we get to that, it's always interested me the logistics that goes into that choir that you mentioned. How is that like? Is it some specific person that handles that, or?
Well, it's definitely a team effort, and it's certainly not me. So this was actually our 41st year of doing that. So the choir started in 1982, and was when we went on our first choir trip. And so now, like, I'm the beneficiary of years and years and years of figuring out a program, a schedule. It's pretty much a well-oiled machine right now. And it's, like I said, it's a whole team. I direct the choir, but like I've got a whole team, a guy that kind of helps oversee my musicians, a couple of guys, our keys player and bass player, and then I've got I'm no vocalist, and so I've got 3 girls that two of them all 3 of them are my cousins, and they all help teach parts and everything like that. But then my uncle, he kind of oversees the logistics, and I mean, it really is. It's like a whole group effort. But
how long does that take from the initial planning to the actual choir? Like, how much time?
It's pretty much always the plan's always kind of evolving. We start trying to plan around the first of the year for the tour. But I think we scheduled somebody even as close as like 3 weeks before we went on tour. So it's always kind of evolving, and the tour lasts about 10 days. So, but then the youth choir will sing. We might make some smaller trips throughout the year. Like we were at Pastor Rick Gonzalez's church for their dedication service. A couple months ago, the choir came and sang at that, and then of course the choir sings at home as well. So it's always going, but the tour itself, that happens either in June or July every year.
I listened to, I think you had an album out, right, with the Mattoon choir. Are you guys planning on doing that again, or?
We've talked about it. So we put out an album in I think it was 2018 is when the album came out. And I think that was our sixth one, our fifth or our sixth album. So our first one was in the 80s. We did a couple in the 90s. We did a couple in the 80s, couple in the 90s, and then one in the 2000s, and then just in 2018. So we've talked about doing some, but I think rather than doing a whole album, I think we would just probably do some singles or something.
Yeah.
So
I think it was pretty good. I like the album. There was a song that we usually do in Spanish, and I heard it in English for the first time in that album. I was like, oh, I didn't know it was in English too.
Oh, really? Which one?
Yeah. I Will Celebrate, Sing Unto the Lord.
Oh, yeah. So that was like, I think that was in the 90s.
Yeah.
It's old school.
Yeah. So, I mean, we used to sing it also like in the 2000s, whatever. And then I heard it in English. I was like, oh, I didn't know this song was in English. But yeah, again, thank you for being with us. You preached a good message, waiting on the Lord. And I just want to maybe talk to you about that a little bit. But before we do, I just ask everyone that is following us and listening to us, just if you can just keep following us on social media. We're putting out a lot of content. We had the privilege to record several guests in this last week, and Brother Nixon just being one of them. And if you can follow us and just give us a 5-star review in any platform that we're in. And again, just Brother Nixon, you preached, just waiting on the Lord. Can you just go about how that sermon came about and speak to that a little bit?
Sure. So I took my text from Genesis 49, and Jacob is at the end of his life. And the whole basis of the message, and I don't know how extensive or how much you would want me to say, or just a brief overview, but the whole basis of the message was that Jacob was awfully impulsive when making some of his decisions. And I made a statement in there that I think that the currency of God is time. It's not in the money that we give, it's not in the abilities that we have, the gifting, the talents, how hard we work, but oftentimes it's the Lord wanting to see how long we're willing to walk through the wilderness. And, Jacob, he cheats his brother out of his birthright, lies to his dad, and he goes and he finds Rachel, works 7 years for Rachel. Then he finds Leah, or he gets Leah, who people think's the good, ugly sister, And then he works again another 7 years to get Rachel. And, the Bible says that when he was working for Rachel, it seemed unto him but for a few days. And the principle there is that because when it's something that's pleasing to your flesh, the thing that comes easy, all of a sudden it's like, hey, this isn't taking that much time. And that's kind of where a lot of us are today. It's all about pleasing flesh, and it's what's appealing to the eye, and how can we, and those things seem to go by quickly, but when it's these deep things of God, it's like, all of a sudden it's like you're just dragging yourself to make sure that you're doing what's right. And the basis of the message is that if you're willing to wait, if you're willing to do all of these things that the Lord has asked you to do, the deep things of God, that God will reward you in ways that didn't seem possible. Because in Genesis 49, Jacob, at the end of it all, he says he buries Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Rebekah, and then he says, and I buried Leah there. Of all the wives he had, and more specifically Leah and Rachel, he buries Rachel on the side of the road, and he takes Leah to Machpelah, which means double portion. It was the place of overflow. It was, when it was all said and done, these are the ones that I want to be established with the rest of the patriarchs. And, I mean, it's, and like I said, I don't know how much you're wanting me to go into this or not, but time is no object with God. He doesn't care how long it takes. And I actually just had a conversation with some young adults last Wednesday night, and some of them were worried about getting married and what do I do going to school and all of these things. And I just told them sometimes you have to wonder, why am I waiting? Why is God making me wait? You have to ask that question. You have to do some self-examination and be honest with yourself. Why am I not married yet? Why do I not have the job yet? Why don't I have my place in ministry yet? Why am I, for those that are, looking to pastor or looking to whatever, why is this not happening? Well, could it be that the Lord is trying to make sure that you're prepared so when He does bring that forward, those opportunities, that you don't mess it up? I mean, for me, and I wouldn't say that the message I preached today was birthed out of not being married or not getting particular ministry opportunities. But I think all of us, in a lot of ways, we get concerned, we get maybe even bitter at God, wondering why isn't it happening like I want it to happen? And I'll use my wife for example. Like I told you, it was a quick work for us, as far as getting married. But I don't know that I could have been married last year or the year before that. I mean, the Lord brought so many things together all at one time for me, secularly and not, and spiritually, secularly and spiritually. He brought it all together, and it was perfect timing for me. If I would have met my wife 2 years ago, and we wanted to get married 2 years ago, we would have really struggled, had to learn some hard lessons. But through the grace of God, at 27 years old, there were some lessons I had to learn and some things that God had to beat out of me until I could have those things. And now being on the other side of it, I wasn't as thankful then, but I'm extremely thankful now. And I think that's just the waiting game for God. And I don't know that the Lord sits there and thinks, okay, I just want to make people miserable. But He does love you enough to say, you're not ready yet. My grandfather always says it this way. He says, when we ask God questions, our question about a particular instance or situation, we love it when He says yes. And honestly, really, we don't even mind it when He says no. If we feel clear direction, like God said, no, this isn't my will, we're really okay with it. Where we have an issue with God is when He says wait. And you start waiting around, especially if you feel, and I don't mean self-righteous, but if you feel righteous, if you feel like, man, I'm doing everything my pastor's asking me to do, I'm praying, I'm reading. Think about it this way. So Moses, he spends 40 years in Egypt, and then he spends 40 years in the wilderness waiting. Because remember, we learned something from Moses really early on when he kills that Egyptian taskmaster and buries him in the sand. Even before he was ready, we know that inherently Moses is a deliverer of people. So God had he's not ready then. He's not ready in his youth. So he goes to the wilderness for 40 years, right? He takes care of his father-in-law Jethro's sheep. When he comes out of there and the burning bush experience happens, he delivers the children of Israel. What was the reward for the wilderness for Moses? More wilderness. He's waiting to deliver his people. God says, wait, you're not ready. God takes him, prepares him, takes care of another man's flock, learns how to be a shepherd, a carer of people. He delivers his people, and then God says, okay, time to wait more in the wilderness. Oftentimes, the reward of waiting is more waiting. It's never something you outgrow. And it's because it's never pleasing to the flesh. And this flesh, you just got to kill every day, man. You got to just be that. And that's why fasting, that's why early morning prayer, that's why in a world where people hate to read, because reading takes time, and it's better to just, that's why those things are so good for your spirit, and they're good for your flesh too, because they all take time.
That's, again, great sermon. I think, yes, that's all I have to say about that. Yeah.
Okay.
But speaking to that, because I know you, when you preach a sermon, you don't do it unless it's convicted you, unless it's hit you, or at least you shouldn't, right?
Sure.
And so you said it wasn't with your wife that you had to deal with. Is there something that you did have to go through that waiting period? Something specific or?
No, nothing in particular that comes to. I mean, now, and you'll understand this. Was it for? And there's probably 2 or 3 people that I have just annoyed. At how come I'm not married yet and all this stuff. So I mean, yes, I had to pass the test of learning to be a husband. And I mean, I don't know if you're this way. I'm inherently extremely selfish. I mean, maybe that's the nature of man. Maybe it's not. It's definitely the nature of Nixon Doughty. I want to do things my way. I want to be left alone. I'm inherently a hermit. I don't like, I mean, it's fine with me to go sit in my room, sit on my couch and read a book for hours at a time, God had to teach me how to be a husband and get some of those things out. So maybe not being married could play a part in things like that. I think everybody... I was raised in a house that you never wanted to be, my father, my mother beat it into me to never be content with where you were at. And, if I did something well, the next time my father always said, well, you got to do better next time. It's like if I preach, it was like, oh, okay, preach better next time, or even if in anything, it didn't even have to be spiritual. But they tried to grill into me, don't be content, always be better. The next, whatever for me, sometimes for me it was playing an instrument, well, good job, but next service, there was a couple sour notes or whatever. That's just the way they were, and they weren't mean about that, but the expectation was, hey, be better. And so when I say that, maybe there wasn't anything super drastic, but maybe from the perspective of, you're always longing to be better. You're always wanting to do better. Well, with that comes new levels. With that comes new opportunity. And so you would never, it was just the mindset of my dad. It's like, okay, if somebody asks you to preach Sunday morning, Sunday night, why aren't they asking you to preach on Monday too? You know what I'm saying? So it's like you're always waiting for the next opportunity to minister, or the next opportunity to let the Lord use you. And maybe some people could look at that and say, well, that's a little selfish or egotistical, or you need to learn to be content with where you're at. And maybe there's some truth to that. And in some instances, I'm sure there is, but I guess maybe my philosophy is if I was lost and somebody, and I'm not saying this because I'm like this, ever-reaching, I never stop and take a break. That's not me. I enjoy downtime, things like that. I'm certainly not this all-spiritual, gonna just go win the world kind of guy. But if I was lost, I'd want somebody to not be content for me. Yeah. And so waiting, it's tough. But if you start running ahead of God, you'll destroy yourself pretty quickly.
Now, you mentioned your dad and all that. Let's go back to that. How was that growing up in Pastor Shine Doughty's home,
yeah.
Sister Lisa's Doughty home? Can you talk to that a little bit?
Well, I got to be careful because I want to get myself in trouble.
Because I know that
no, I'm
huge
teasing.
impact.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
No, they are my parents. They are truly 2 of the most incredible people I've ever known. And I say that if I wasn't their son, and from an unbiased perspective, I would feel that way. They are gracious, they are merciful, they are loving, they are strong, they're confident in who they are. They love the Word with everything that's within them. I never have any doubt if my parents are seeking the face of God, if they're reading, if they're in the Word. I feel blessed. I feel very blessed to not only know them, but to grow up in their household. Now, with that, have there been moments of contention? Well, sure, just like I said, because, sometimes you just want somebody to tell you, hey, good job. Yeah. Not, hey, good job, now do better, kind of a deal. And they were never mean or anything like that, you know. But they are people of excellence, and they demand it at all costs because that's what's been demanded of them. So there's been some moments of contention, but nothing that almost ruined our relationship, anything like that. But I mean, I've been so fortunate because I feel like I have instant access to the Word through my father, and I feel like I have instant access to the ear of God through my mother. You know, my dad is a man of the Word, and my mother is a woman of prayer, and so I know I keep repeating myself. I feel blessed. They're amazing.
How did ministry start for you? Like, where did it start?
Well, I don't know that I have like a defining moment. I was raised as a pastor's kid, so you just always kind of knew, you know, ministry was never like, it wasn't an option. It was pretty much mandatory, you know, late nights at the church. And, you know, I guess when I can really start thinking about getting involved, you know, it's probably 12. You get in the youth choir when you're 12. I was 12 years old. My dad started asking me to learn to play the bass. I got involved in Bible quizzing at 12. But I guess it depends on your definition of ministry. I mean,
I'm just serving.
Sure, yeah, serving.
Serving.
You know, I was like 13, 14, 15 years old when, you know, we'd have conferences at the church, and my mom would say, hey, you need to just, you know, they're going to be a dinner afterwards, start, you know, make sure everybody's got drinks, or, you know, fix people a plate of food, or, hey, whenever we're done with that, you guys stick around, clean the dishes, or, you know, I mean, I don't really remember it. I mean, when I was old enough to not be a punk kid, I guess, you know, where I could be given some responsibility. So, you know, my early teenage years. So it was, but yeah, my parents, and the thing about my parents that was so great when it came to ministry, and I know that not everybody, especially preachers' kids, man, I feel for them. I really do. I have such a burden for them. My parents had a unique way of showing my sister and I that ministry was an honor. It wasn't like a punishment. There was never negative connotations to ministry. It was, hey, you're getting to serve. You're getting to serve these powerful, powerful men and women of God. And they gave us that mindset from an early on. So for us, it was always, hey, what can I do to help? There was never a negative connotation with ministry. And I think some people get that in their mind. It's, well, if you're going to be involved in ministry, then it's late hours. If you're going to be involved in ministry, then it's dealing with people's problems. And it's like, I think the greatest compliment in Scripture is when the devil comes to God on behalf of Job, and he says, well, you just bless all these people. And the Lord says, well, have you considered my servant Job? You want to talk about one of the biggest compliments in Scripture is that God could look at a man and say, I could take away everything from him and he'll still love me. And for ministry, that's my outlook. Of all the people God could trust to grow up and shine in Lisa Doughty's household, to be given a platform to preach, to be given an opportunity to serve some of these great men and women of God who have prayed and fasted and studied and heard from God. What an honor. And that's, I think anybody that tries to make ministry, make that, you know, have that mindset for ministry, anything other than that, you probably won't last long.
You said the bass. How did that evolve to, because you're playing, what's your instrument now? Because it's not the bass, right?
No, not really. I actually don't play that much anymore of anything. But if I do, it's primarily keys or the organ. So, and this goes back to my father. So we had started a new program at the church called New Musicians. And New Musicians was a program that got it gave people like 5 weeks of free lessons in a group setting. So you could do piano, guitar, bass, drums, or vocals. My dad's like, he's like, hey, we're starting this new program. You need to be involved in and help sponsor it. Like, okay, what do you want me to play? And he's like, I'll play the bass. That's what I played. I'm like, okay. So the whole thing that I did with music, that was all out of obedience. So I played the bass, and then I was 15 years old. And my dad's like, hey, learn to play the keys. I'm like, okay. And so that's kind of how, obedience is greater than sacrifice kind of a deal. I had really no interest in music. I can't sing, and that's not like a humility thing. Like I literally, it just doesn't compute for me. I can't make my voice do what, it's annoying because my parents are both good singers. My whole family can sing. Didn't work for me. So I didn't really have, I was 12 years old thinking, oh, I just want to preach, but I started playing, and I'll tell you, up until just a few years ago, majority of the places that I preached at, I got those gigs because I'd done something with them in music.
So you started in music. You said you don't do that anymore. You're doing, I think, the choir, right, majority. But how did you preaching out start? Because I know you do that as well. How did that start? How did that come about?
Yeah. So, you know what? Honestly, I just started going to things and meeting people, and I started playing at different conferences or things like that, and I would get to know people, and I always, and not for the purpose to preach, but I believe that you know people by their conversation, so if people's main conversation is kingdom stuff, that's probably what they're thinking about a lot. So I always try to make sure my conversation is kingdom stuff. And, I'd start talking Bible and stuff with people. People be like, man, do you preach? I'm like, yeah. I didn't preach my first sermon until I was 18 years old.
How did that go?
Terrible. I was terrible. But we had one get the Holy Ghost. I was sincere. And actually the kid that plays the bass for the youth choir, who I lean on heavily, he got the Holy Ghost. In that service, it was terrible. I preached like 15 minutes.
Was this at home or?
This was at home.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then the very first place I preached out was to 2 old ladies. It was a home missions church. I preached to 2 ladies. That was the first time I ever preached out.
And how did that evolve over time? Because I'm sure you're better now.
Yeah. It just, with preaching out, it's an unfortunate truth. It puts your feet to the fire, and I do my best to not feel this way. When I pray before I get ready to preach somewhere, I have a little bit of a routine that I pray as far as preparing my spirit to make sure that my flesh is in subjection, to make sure that it's all about God and the souls that are going to be there. Unfortunately, when you're evangelizing, you feel like every Sunday is a job interview. And if you don't do a good job, they're not going to ask you to come work for them again. And that's an unfortunate truth. I feel thankful that I feel like I've gotten past that. I don't feel that way anymore. I feel very confident that, Lord, I'm going to do whatever you want me to do, and whatever happens after that. And if it's the will of God for me to never preach again and work a 9 to 5, then I'll do that to the best of my ability, and I'll minister in what ways I can there too. But I think things like that just evolve naturally, and it's kind of like natural selection. If you're praying and studying and you connect with people, God's going to give you a word for somebody, but if you're not praying and studying, God's not going to talk to you. Why would he give somebody who doesn't have a relationship with him intimate things?
Is that, do you think, an important thing to let young ministers know, the relationship aspect of just having a relationship with God? Can you convey that, the importance of that?
The best way that I can describe it is, it's got to be more important than anything. I've told the Lord several times, if preaching out is going to cause me to go to, like, if it's going to inflate my ego and my head to the point where I would eventually walk away from truth or whatever, Lord, I'd rather not do it. Because I would rather have a relationship with him than not. So the best way I can describe it is through this biblical example, Mary and Martha. Jesus comes, and Martha's tidying up the house. She's trying to get everything ready. And Jesus comes and sits down, and Mary sits at his feet and washes his feet. It's the poor you have with you always kind of a deal. I think we a lot of times will equate our significance and importance in the kingdom to how much we say we do in his name. Well, Lord, yourself, for instance, a man in your position. Well, Lord, I did the podcast today. I was at Spanish camp all week working hard. Lord, I helped in the services. I should have a break from not reading the word today. Does that sound like relationship? Because that's why Jesus preferred Mary over Martha. He would rather be with the ones that want to sit at his feet than the ones that work for him in his name. Yeah. Now, is there a balance in those? Yes, absolutely. You can't just sit in your prayer closet 12 hours a day and never talk to anybody. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah. But their relationship with Jesus has to be priority number one. I heard somebody explain it. You got to be jealous for your time with him. People are jealous at their work. They're not going to show up late for work. They're going to make sure they eat every day. They're going to make sure that they spend time with their wife and kids if they're a good spouse and father or, mother. Are you as jealous for a relationship with Jesus as you are for everything else in this life? How many people at the end of the day say, oh man, I just got too busy to eat. No, about 11:30, that stomach starts growling. You're like, when's the time to eat? Nobody goes 3 weeks and think, oh man, I haven't even ate yet. But that's what we do with him. Because, and in turn, you don't have that relationship. People wonder why some of those prayers don't get answered. And I don't know. I don't want to sound too harsh.
No, go ahead.
I
just let it go.
Yeah, okay. So think about it this way. So Elisha, and is this okay?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I don't know what the time restraint is, or if I'm.
I don't even. I'm not even looking at it.
Okay.
I actually bought a clock for the wall to see, but it hasn't come in. It's been months.
Okay.
But go ahead.
Well, if at any point I'm saying anything you don't like, you just shut me down. So Elisha's at the end of his life, and King Joash comes to him and he says, the Moabites are getting ready to invade the land. And you know this story. So Elisha says, okay, go get a bow and arrows. Take the arrows. What's he say? Strike the ground. He strikes the ground 2 or 3 times. And Elisha says, I would have rather you stricken at 5 or 6 because then you could have totally driven them out. What's the principle there? The principle is that when you're not constantly surrounded and not constantly pouring in, you don't have the discernment to know how often you should. Because Joash says to Elijah, he says, oh, my father, and the chariot of Israel and the horsemen thereof. Joash, when speaking to Elisha, he's quoting Elisha to Elisha. Because remember, when the mantle's passed, Elisha says to him, oh, my father, and the chariot of Israel and the horsemen thereof. So then Joash, at the end of Elisha's life, he comes to him and he knows the things to say. He knows to fall on his knees and cry. And that's what we do. We come to a service on Sunday and we think to ourselves, we know how to manipulate God. We'll run to an altar, we'll cry, we'll repent, and then we think, okay, God will pull us out of our situation. This is what happens to Joash. I know the right things to say to Elisha. I know how to make it seem like I'm sincere. All right, well, Elisha says some time to strike the ground. Strikes it 3 times. It's not enough. So God gives them deliverance 3 times, but then as soon as Elisha dies, the Moabites invade and take over Israel. The principle is, you cannot have relationship, and enough times you'll know how to get a hold of God and say, and God will deliver you. Sure, he'll deliver you once or twice or 3 times because he's a forgiving and merciful and gracious and loving God. But eventually there's going to come a time where God says, you know what, you've not had enough relationship with me. You've not put enough into this, and you don't have the discernment to know when it's time to really build relationship with me. And that's what happened to Joash.
How has your relationship with God evolved? Do you remember how it started and how it has evolved from time?
It evolve is a good word. It has certainly evolved, and I'm still learning. Getting married has thrown a wrench in things.
Why?
in a sense of, I mean, before I mean, take this how I mean it. I answered to no one. As far as like when I came home during the day,
Yeah.
I could sit there and read or sit there and pray, you know, in my room by myself and not have to worry about a thing. Well, now there's somebody who's always next to me. And I don't know how anybody else is, but I get a little self-conscious, you know, about talking to the Lord about certain things. Even somebody as close to me as my wife.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm weird for that.
No.
But when I was a kid, you know, it was a lot of gimme, 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 gimme kind of stuff. I've tried to make my prayer life more about others than me. And man, I feel terrible saying all this. It sounds like I'm just bragging on myself.
No,
And
you're fine.
I understand in the context I'm saying it.
Yeah.
That you're asking, so I'm telling. I'm not trying to sound like I'm the most righteous and spiritual man that ever walked the planet. I'm not, but I've tried to pray more for others than myself. I'm trying to read more than I ever have. And not just spiritual books or self-help books, leadership books, but like the Bible. I want to read the Bible more, and that has helped my spirituality because it's his words instead of somebody else's words about him, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. You know, you always, for certain, I try and do more listening. You know, sometimes it's like, you and I think would struggle in a relationship if I talked 100% of the time and you didn't talk at all.
Yeah.
So a lot of my prayer life now sounds like 5 minutes of prayer, 2 minutes of silence, and then 2 minutes of prayer and 5 minutes of silence, and maybe some writing some stuff down in there. You know, it was before when I was an immature kid, you know, I made sure I prayed for 30 minutes and I just made sure I spoke the whole time. I never gave God a chance to talk to me.
Yeah.
That's not relationship. So now I do a lot of listening. Now, that's not to say that if you walk in your prayer room or sit in your recliner, you can just be silent the whole time and say, all right, God, speak to me. But I pray until I feel an impression, or sometimes, you know, a story will come to my mind or a person will to pray for. You know, whereas before it was like I just had a list of things I knew I needed to pray for. So and maybe in that way it's evolved a little bit. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, yeah,
Or,
I get it. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I understand. How now you said, you know, you brought your wife into it.
Yeah.
How did you know how has that impacted you? Going from that, hey, I can do whatever I want.
Yeah.
And then to this, like, has there been any contention there as far as, I mean, not, I don't
Sure,
want
yeah,
to get
no.
personal, but, you know.
It has been a transition.
Yeah.
And my wife is top tier. I mean, she's patient, she's kind, it's hard for anybody to feel uncomfortable around her. She connects so well with people. She's never, you know, nobody is out of the, she feels like she's got to be friends with, I mean, she's an amazing, amazing, amazing person. And I'm very thankful that God gave her to me. Because Lord, no, I needed it.
Wait, let me ask you this before you go into that.
Sure.
You said you're an orange. I think we were talking about that.
Yeah.
What color is she?
You know what? I don't know and I feel like I'm good at diagnosing how people communicate. And I don't know, man. I would assume that all of her colors are pretty close. She's got a lot of blue. She's very caring. She's got some orange in her. Gold is probably her lowest color. She'll tell you she's structured and organized. She's not. She likes the idea of it. I think that's why she likes me. I like structure. I like lists. I like goals. She likes that. She's not that, but she likes that. I would say she's probably blue, orange. I would say green and gold are her lowest two.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's okay.
I didn't even forget what you were saying.
We're talking about learning to adjust with getting married. It has been different. I had somebody explain to me this way, because, before I would set an hour aside every day. Now, I don't have as much time on my hands. So now I find myself praying in my truck from one destination to the next, or, and I don't want to be graphic or put an image in anybody's mind, but, like in the shower, or, if I'm going to the gym, or if I'm whatever, I'm finding myself praying in more 5, 10, 15-minute increments than just sitting down for an hour. And when I counseled about that, it was the change in me from going to having a prayer life to a life of prayer. And rather than putting God and saying, hey, God, you have this 1 hour a day to speak to me, I've tried to open my spiritual senses to, hey, Lord, at any point you can start talking and I'm listening.
Has that helped you? Have you seen?
It's been good, but my wife kind of forced me into that. And that was one of those things that it just comes with like spiritual maturity. I would have never thought about that because I didn't have anything in my life that was going to push me into that, if that makes sense. Yeah. But my wife, now spending time with her, coming home and having that responsibility, it's like, oh, well, yeah, I don't have an hour a day to run to the church. I'm not going to neglect her. I'm not going to neglect God. So I've got to find a way to bring all of this together. So that has been a little bit of a transition for myself, learning how to balance all of that. And it's not brought any contention at all. We've sat down and talked about it many times. And it really, if I can just be totally transparent, we've felt really guilty in some ways, thinking like, oh my goodness, I only got to pray 10 minutes today, or I only, and we've had to learn to start saying, okay, hey, from the moment I wake up, if I've got, rather than pulling up my phone or whatever, I'm going to be really, really intentional. And all, like I said, being in all transparency, it's been a learning curve for us, where we've had to say, we're not going to allow the excuse of, well, we're married now, we don't have time. We're going to find a way to make this work.
What does the future look like for you? Like, do you have any goals or anything you're looking forward to? Yeah.
Not to sound cliche, but it's wherever the Lord would lead us. I know that I can be sure of one thing of my future. The Lord will be in the middle of it all. And it's like I said to you earlier, if that's pastoring, fantastic. If that's evangelizing, awesome. If it's sitting under somebody and just teaching Bible studies, love it. If it's working a 9 to 5 and the Lord never affords me another opportunity to ever speak to anybody about His Word again, if that's what He wants, I'm happy to do it. And I know I don't want to tempt God, so I want to say that cautiously. But I hope that in my heart of hearts, that I mean that, and that the Lord would know that I mean that. Whatever the future, whatever the goal, as long as the Lord's in the middle of it, and as long as I'm still in truth, then I would hope I would be satisfied in that.
Now, I think we had a good conversation. I think there's very little people that I can just chat with. And I think I've been able to do that with you very freely. And I'm glad you joined us. And I'm doing it kind of backward just to wrap up, but
Okay.
I usually ask this at the top. I'm just going to ask this at the bottom. But what's your first memory? Like what?
My first memory?
Yeah, like ever. Because I always ask that because I think it's interesting. Like when you think about it, what do you think your first memory is?
Just of anything?
Because like mine, I'll tell you mine. I don't know if I've ever told this on this, but my first memory is, and this is gonna sound like my mom's a terrible mom, but it's just me and my brother in an apartment alone, and she had taken my sister to school.
Okay.
And that's my first memory, and I always thought an interesting question to ask, because that's the first thing that comes to my mind.
All right, so I can think of my earliest memory. Okay, this is gonna sound very silly. I can't believe I'm gonna say this. And I know that my parents and there's my dad right there. My parents and especially my sister, she's gonna probably clip this and put it on social media. The first memory that I have is the first house that I lived in. My mom's parents, my grandparents owned it, and we lived there for like the first 4 years of my life. And I can remember being 3 years old, and I didn't. I struggled with potty training, and I remember going up to I had messed my pants. And I remember going up to the attic and hiding from my parents because I knew I was going to be in trouble. And I can remember my parents coming up in that attic and being like, "Nixon, what are you doing? Did you mess your pants again?" I'm like, "I did." I know that sounds crazy, and I know you can edit that out if you need to. But that is, and you know what? Here's the thing. People say all the time, don't try and be like anybody else. Be yourself. Don't try and put on a facade. I'm just being real. This is just Nixon Doughty. That is the earliest memory that I have, is being like 3 years old and messing my pants in the attic of the first house that I lived in.
I'm just glad I didn't ask that at the top.
It would have probably set the tone for the rest of the...
Yeah.
Yeah.
I always just ask that question because my memory is just like, that's it. That's all I remember. And
I don't know if it's... I think I got whipped after that, so I don't know if it's just like a traumatic experience or... I don't know why that resonates, but that's about the earliest memory that I have. I was probably 3 years old.
Yeah.
So,
are you ready for kids?
Am I ready for kids? I'll tell you my philosophy on children. I think that life is, other than the Holy Ghost, is the most precious gift that God can give anybody. And if God, and there's so many people, biblically and today, that could never have kids, and they would want them desperately. If God ever blessed me with kids, I would never one time be upset about it. I would always be thankful for life. With that being said, no. I've done so much traveling, and every girl I've ever dated has been a long-distance relationship. So my wife is the first girl that I've ever been able to spend every day with and had everyday relationship with. So right now we've talked about just kind of, enjoying each other, getting to know each other, and having a little bit of liberty. And I love kids. I've got 3 nephews. They're 1, 2, and 3. They suffice for now. If I found I was gonna have kids tomorrow, I wouldn't be upset.
Yeah.
But if God gave me my choice, we'll wait probably a little bit. So
I'm glad that you had time to sit down with us.
Yeah.
Again, I'm happy.
Me.
I asked that question at the bottom.
Well, I'm sorry, but if that is just out of order,
I'm gonna keep it in. No, I'm
okay.
gonna keep it in because I think it's awesome. But I appreciate the impact that your family has on this church, and thank you for taking some time with us. Maybe we can talk some other time.
I'd love to
go in a little bit deeper. But I want to thank everyone that's just listening to us and that kept up with us on this podcast journey. And if you can I encourage you to just keep following us on social media. Give us a 5-star review in any platform that you're listening to. And we're happy that we can get guests and people have given us their time. And we hope to see you next week here on the Calvary Podcast.